Hello, everybody. Hey, thank you for joining us again, once again, on Dad Deleted. And I would like to ask if you would hit like or subscribe or go crazy and do both. Um, so, as you know, this is a podcast or a YouTube channel or whatever else you want to call it about parental alienation and specifically about my story, our story, myself and my kids. And what happens. And so I've had about a week off. I'm back in school, and so time has been taken up writing some papers and doing some assignments for a couple of classes. So anyway, I've got a little break now. So yay! Um, and so I wanted to take a minute. I was having a conversation with my wife yesterday, and we're just talking about. I forgot how it came up, but just what had happened, and what does parental alienation? What does that really mean in in the real world, in your real life? What are the ramifications? Right? What happens? And it hit me. There was something there that probably should be talked about. And then last night I had a dream, and as most dreams are, it was a weird dream, but there was a part in there. Um, my middle son was in the dream with me, and I think all the kids were there, and my wife is in there, um, and I think we were on a college campus, and we were looking for something, looking for a building, looking for a class. I'm not sure, but I was with my kids, but specifically, I remember my middle son, but he was young. He was probably in the dream, maybe like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years old. And I remember, like um, hmm, um, we're walking down a sidewalk, um, and he's holding my hand, um, the strange thing about dreams is they don't always um, make sense. And in this one, it didn't make sense. He was young; he was 5 or 6, but I had the sense um, of how unusual it was that he was holding my hand, even though when he was 5 or 6, that wasn't unusual. But so, I mean, the dream was kind of being informed by real life and modern day. Um, but I just remember being so happy um, that he was um, holding my hand. And um, I remember in the dream, uh, I, I bent down um, and whispered into his ear something like, um, "Please, just tell me um, that you'll never leave. Um, just tell me, uh, sorry, um, just tell me that you will always love me." And and I think he said something like, "Of course, Daddy." And I just remember, even in the dream, getting emotional in the dream, and and I just remember that the sensation that my back was almost perfectly flat, like I was leaning over him. But it's just a weird thing to have a remembrance of. But it was almost like just a very like an angle. The back with my legs like it was a 90-degree angle. For some reason that stood out to me, but I just stayed there. Um, because in the dream I was tearing up, and I didn't want other people to see that I was upset. And because there were a lot of people around, we're on a campus, and I just remember staying in that moment, um, in the dream for what seemed like an eternity, and I'm sure it was just nanoseconds. But yeah, I miss him. So, um, so we'll move on as we have to do. Um, and so it kind of that dream kind of plays into what we're going to talk about. What I talked about with my wife yesterday, which is what does parental alienation look like in real life, and what does it do, you know, and what it does is it takes up all your time and it takes all your energy and it redirects your thoughts and your energy away from your children. Even if you're fighting for your kids, you end up fighting against your kids, or you end up fighting against their wishes or what they think their wishes are, what their wishes have been told to them to be. And that's the real tragedy. And that's what happened with us, you know, especially as your kids get older. And if they're being actively alienated from you, what happens is that they are pawns. They are, they're being directed, right? They're actors in the alienator's play. And the crazy thing is they don't know that they're actors. They think, just like my kids would have told you, and most kids who are alienated will tell you. As a matter of fact, it's a big point in most books that the kids will almost always say, "These are my ideas. These are my feelings. These are my thoughts." And what, do you think that I'm too young or too stupid to have my own thoughts or ideas? And so again, you're on the other side. You're on the other side of your kids. And so when an alienating parent begins to alienate you, and you fight that, and you push for more time, or you push for a better relationship, what you have to be careful not to do is to, number one, don't put your kids either in the middle. That's bad. But what's worse is to put your kids on the other side as if they're an enemy to you. So just remember, your kids are unwitting victims. And I don't know if you know who Patty Hearst is, or if you've heard of her situation, but she was kidnapped and at some point then began to actively participate in these robberies with her captors. And, you know, they call it the Stockholm Syndrome. And basically it's where a person begins to align themselves, or they begin to see themselves connected to their captors. And you see this a lot of times with kidnapped children. You'll see these children who have been with their captors for years and years, and they don't try and escape, and they don't try and run. And it starts out as, well, who knows, you know, they tell them if they run that they'll die, or their loved ones will die. But at some point, the human being adapts to their present circumstances. And your kids, if they are being alienated from you, your kids will adapt. And the crazy thing is, it's not like there's a kidnapper that's started telling them all this stuff or explaining to them how, uh, you're the bad guy. It's their parent, the parent that they trust, the parent that they love, the parent uh, that, as far as they know, has got their best interest at heart. Why would mom lie to me? Why would my dad lie to me? Um, and so they begin to believe the lie. And so you have to be careful not to put them on the other side with the alienator. And that's really hard because, like in our case, towards the end, my kids were, I had two teenagers and one who was just turned 11. And, um, and so when you're dealing with teenagers, you're dealing with a whole nother ball game, right? And so you've got a situation where you've got kids who are coming into their own. They're getting a little more mature. And so it gets worse because they get a little braver. I mean, think about when you were a teenager. Did you have any situations with your mom or your dad where, you know, you got a little more brave, a little more bold? Well, I'll tell you what's going on, pops, right? You probably did. I mean, even the best kid is gonna have a time or two as they get older where they push up against parental authority. And if you're in a parental alienation situation, it's not that they even the, they've got this natural inclination, right, to push up against parental authority, but they also have this other parent and these other influences who are pushing them headlong and hard against you, and almost not just encouraging, but almost enforcing that has to happen. And so you're going to get pushed back. It's much worse and much on a grander scale. And that's what was happening with us. And so it's hard to look at your kids who are now teenagers and they are being so rude and so disrespectful that you can't believe that these are the same kids. But that's what's happening. And it's really easy to get angry at them, and it's really easy to put the blame on them, but you can't do it. And so I would encourage you, you know, have someone else that you can talk to, your spouse, your friend, your parents, your pastor or your priest, a therapist, somebody. You've got to be able to deal with it, and at the same time not take it out on your kids, and so that's hard. The other thing is that, you know, things that that used to be fun, just like, you know, hanging out, watching television, being silly, playing games. As the alienation continues and it gets worse, and the response by your kids has to get worse. They have to show the alienating parent that they are in the game, that they are on their side. And so the pushback that you're going to get is worse, and it's going to grow and it's going to get worse. And that's what happens. That is the nature of the beast. Alienation does not hit a level and then stagnate. It continues, and it will continue until one or two things happen. Either you're out, or somehow the court steps in, unlikely, and stops the other parent, the alienating parent, from their behavior. But that's it. This is one of those situations, and this is what drives me crazy when I hear people say this, you know, but I get where they're coming from when they say, well, but, you know, a child needs both parents. Yes, a child does need both parents. However, if I were to say to you, well, one of those parents, whenever they're with the child, they beat the child, they physically abuse the child, they sexually abuse the child, would you then still say that that child needs both parents? No, you wouldn't. You absolutely wouldn't, unless you are insane. You wouldn't say that. You would say, yes, something has to be done. And unfortunately, and it is unfortunate for the kids, one parent needs to be removed from the situation. And so it's no different with parental alienation. We're talking about emotional and psychological abuse of a child. That's what you're dealing with when you're dealing with parental alienation. It is that simple. And so it should be dealt with as any other form of abuse. And so that parent should be removed. And look, at first, if you want to take it slow, if you want to say, hey, look, let's take it to supervised visitation with the alienating parent getting some therapy from a therapist who is fully aware and able to work through psychological issues that parent may be having, and working through parental alienation issues and understanding the manipulation that goes on there, then absolutely. But if that doesn't work, then you have to go to another level, and maybe it's 90 days, 120 days, 90 days as Dr. Childress recommends, to see if there is the potential to break that cycle of parental alienation behavior in the children. But then I would say, if that parent continues on, or if the kids aren't able to break out of that thought process, then that 90 days has to become a year. And if it still doesn't work, then that parent needs to be removed from that child's life entirely. If they can't support a healthy, loving relationship between the children and the other parent, then in my mind, the court has no other option. And that's the option that you would exercise if you had a parent who was abusing the child in some other way. You wouldn't allow that child to stay in that situation. You wouldn't allow the child to continue to be abused. That in itself would be child abuse. But it doesn't happen. And I don't understand why, except that I guess the abuse is just not, there's just not enough bruises. Because it's hard to see a bruised psyche. It's hard to see a bruised mind. You can see a bruised body. You can see a broken body. It's hard to see a broken heart, a broken mind. So I don't know what we're going to do about that. I know there are groups out there who are working hard, though. I will say this. There's a group out there that is there's a group out there that's trying to work on several groups out there trying to work on legislation in various states, and so best luck to all those efforts. And so we've got to do something, because what happens is, and I'll close with this. Alienation robs you of whatever time you have with your kids, because even when they're with you, and in my situation, for the last several years, I was the primary parent. I was the custodial parent. I had my kids 80% of the time, but the alienation had already taken root, and she was continuing. The mom was still alienating on phone calls and Skype calls multiple times a week, and so she was just watering and feeding, right? The planting had already been done. All she had to do was continue just to keep the soil watered and fertilized, and it would still continue to grow. And we just had no opportunity to do a reset. We were always fighting about, they were fighting me, and I was, and here's the thing too, you can't explain to kids what's going on. They think you are the enemy. They think you're the bad guy. And they'll tell you, you're trying to take us away from our mom, or you're trying to take us away from our dad. When it's ironic, because that that's the whole horrible truth about this whole thing, is that it stands on its head. The whole thing stands on its head. Because the person who's really trying to take you away from someone is the other parent. The alienating parent is the one who's trying to destroy a relationship. The alienated parent is just trying to hold on for dear life to the relationship that they have with the kids. But the kids see it exactly 180 degrees differently than the truth. They didn't come to that on their own. They're guided there. So anyway, I don't know how to do it. But if you can figure out how, in the midst of an alienating situation, to try and recover a relationship, then God bless you. I don't know how to do it. So anyway, I don't know that this helped, but I wanted to share it, and we'll continue to do them, and maybe they'll get better, and maybe they won't, but I hope that you learned something from it. I pray you do. I really do. And if nothing else, at least you know you're not the only one that's struggling with this horrible thing called parental alienation. So anyway, until next time, I certainly do appreciate you spending time with me, and God bless you guys who are going through this. And remember, above all else, love your kids.